I'm here today with the guy who made Spartan chess, and he did it a while ago. With the help of someone on chessvariance.com, I believe it was H.G. Muller.
That is correct, H.G. Muller.
Uh, he engine balanced it using Fairy Max back in the day. It's one of the first times that ever happened. Currently, Fairy Stockfish is being really weird about it, so I'm not sure how good the data is. Why did you make Spartan chess?
Okay. I played chess in college, and it was right at the time that Bobby Fischer had made chess very popular in the United States. And I went and entered a tournament, and I was in the unrated section, and there were so many people. There was actually 16 people in the unrated division, and I won my division, won my very first tournament. But I wasn't very satisfied because I I kind of stole it. I had two guys played better than me. Let's just put it that way. No question about it. I can go into the details of that. But I made a study of what it takes to be good at chess. And it turned out, though I'm fascinated by chess and love it, I do not have the visual abilities to even visualize a chessboard and move pieces around on it. And that's something that's really required to play at the top level. So that and other reasons gave it up, but maintained my lifelong fascination with it. And I thought that I started, okay, so there's that aspect, fascination with chess.
Mm-hmm.
The other is how I would put myself to bed, sleep. At that particular time, years ago, I would go think about chess as I was going to sleep, and part of my brain was very fascinated with what I was doing. The rest of it would just drift off to sleep. But while I was doing it, I started dreaming of other chess variants and chess pieces and what it could be. Okay. And sometimes I'd wake up in the morning, and I guess my brain had worked on it during night because it revealed I should do something, and so I would go research it, and found out it had already been done or it wasn't that novel or unique. And so it's in the paper, but I dreamt of all sorts of pieces like legionaries and conquistadors and a whole bunch of things. But I found the chessvariants.com page, which has like 1,500 variants on it. And I knew I wanted to make an asymmetrical.
More than that now.
I wanted to make an asymmetrical game because very seldom do people hit the battlefield with exactly the same armies. So I wanted to make something different, and I became obvious I wanted to make different pieces, and I wanted to do something different with the pawns. And I just seen the movie 300, which is cute but wildly ahistorical. And I'd been doing research about Spartans. And when I woke up in the morning, what was whispered into my ear was Sparta had two kings. And so when I heard that, I go, a chess game with two kings on one side, all the pieces and the pawns different. I had a calling. I had to do it. No particular good reason for it, other than it just became appealing. So I worked on it for about 7 months.
Which is why it turned out so well. Working on it for about 7 months just on this one matchup. But it surprises me that you weren't influenced at all by Bates's chess with different armies.
I saw what he had. I researched it, and I go, they've done some stuff before, and it's like, yeah, there's that.
That's fair. It was... it didn't really have the themes for the armies. He was very focused on the movements of the pieces to be the themes. Which, fair enough. It turned out pretty all right. It turns out that his material calculation errors erred in the side that most of the armies ended up stronger than the chess army.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was influenced by Gothic chess.
That's fair.
Because I knew that I learned of the guy that was doing that and worked with him on that just a bit. And that was a wild experience.
Yeah, Trice is a wild guy.
Enough said about that.
Yeah. What did you think when I reached out to you about Titan's Battalion?
I went, oh, good, fun.
Fair enough. This army has been much gentler on the implementation than Shogi or Shang-Chi. Of course, we have to do less with it.
Well, yeah, the thing is, if somebody had said, hey, the really big problems in programming a chess game are castling and capturing en passant, I would have tried to design that into the game, but H.G. Muller says, "Oh God, there no caching, no impossible. This doesn't happen. You don't know how easy that makes to program the game." So I said, "Oh, good for me."
It does. That's not the only. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Yeah, even Shogi and Shang-Chi have nothing as complicated to code as that. Unless maybe you count... Yeah, if we're doing Shang-Chi chasing rules, those are a nightmare because they're subjective, not objective.
Okay.
And that is never a good thing for programming. Why... How did the captains and lieutenants end up where they are?
You mean positionally on the back rank?
Positionally and like their movements, because it is kind of obvious how you came up with them. It's just
So what I said to myself was, they were the last pieces I created. I said to myself, I need minor pieces. Okay, I need some minor pieces, and they need to be on similar stature to the bishop and the knight, which are about 3 points, 3.5 points, something like that. And I think that the number of points a piece is worth is generally related to how many squares they can hit.
yes.
Like a knight can hit in the middle of the board 8 squares. So I should create 2 pieces that can reach 8 squares. And so, go ahead. Does that answer your question?
Yes. There is some stuff that messes with that, especially once you get into disjoint pieces. Like, a leaper's movement squares are stronger than a slider's movement squares.
Yeah.
So...
But I only leap 2 squares, so it's very limited in how powerful it is.
Yeah, it pretty much maps 1-to-1 with the types of power level that the knight has.
Yeah.
The two of them are easier to pin down than the knight, and easier to influence. Like, if the king and the captain are stuck in an alleyway, the king's gonna kick the captain's ass. That happened last night, where the captain got offsides and the opponent didn't run it away enough, and I was just able to corner it and basically mate that little guy.
Well, it's interesting. A captain is the only minor piece that can force a mate.
Yes, and that interaction where as long as the king is nearby, they have that endgame advantage. Meanwhile, on the other side, if the captain gets separated from their friend, and they're stuck in a corner of the board with just the enemy king, the captain's going to die for basically the same reasons. The overlap in squares.
Right.
So originally you designed this with a chancellor instead of a crowned rook.
Yeah, I did. That is true. What had happened is I had gone on to chess.com, and after 7 months I think this thing's playable now. Of playing games one-on-one to the extent that you can do anything with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to tell a funny story. It was my funniest story. I have a guy that's a gamer who's got a fairly high chess rating, and we'd play. And you would seldom finish a game because we would run into trouble. In any event, also he's one of those guys that will argue his point of the rules to his benefit no matter what. He's one of those guys.
Yeah, which there's some benefit to that in testing, but it can grate on you if you're actually just trying to play.
And so he said, "This is how it works." And I go, No, this is how it works. And so we got into an argument about how this was supposed to work. And I go, "I'm not just making it up." And I go, "Hold on. Yes, I am just making it up. But I'm also writing, every time, I never play tested blind. I always wrote down the rules we were play testing by. So I pulled out the rules and showed it to him, and he grumbled, and we went forward. But anyway, I'm sorry, that was a diversion. What was the question? I was
asking about the general and the warlord.
Oh, yeah. So this is where I went on chess.com and was looking for some people to play test the game with in order to work on play balance. And H.G. Muller wrote me and said, "That will never work. You can't possibly play enough games to to do that. What you should do is program it into my chess engine and play a few thousand games and see what the balance looks like. And I go, oh God, that's a great idea. And so I looked at the stuff and I went back to him. I shot back to him. I go, how do I program two kings onto one side? And a day later, he personally wrote back, you can't. And I go, oh, well, that was too bad. So about 2 days later, he wrote back and asking me, is this exactly how duple check works? And I said, yeah, you got it. And a day or two later, he'd programmed his engine to play the game. Mm-hmm. And so we were off and running trying to, and we found out it was play balance like 2-1 in favor of the Spartans. So we started adjusting pieces independently. He was fascinated by the game for whatever reason.
Because it's well made.
Oh, thank you. In fact, he's made some comments on it that are, well, I'll not go into that right now. But we both simultaneously were changing pieces, and we both simultaneously on the same day changed the general into a crowned rook. Mm-hmm. And it just plain balanced. It just worked. After, we must have played 6,000 games with the computer over like a week. And all of a sudden that just seemed to balance the game, and so done.
Yeah.
Now there's a thing that was written, an article that was pointed out to me. There's very few grandmasters that play basically chess variants. They have too much work just playing the regular game.
Yeah.
And he'd written an article that said that the one thing you could not do in a chess variant is change the pawns. Because, if you change 8 pieces, you're going to change it. One's going to be a little bit better than the other. When you change 8 pieces, you'll never be able to recover from that. And somebody fed me the article. And I said, maybe if you'd read this, you would have never done that. I go, maybe. But so that's led me to ponder, why is the game balanced? It shouldn't be. Anyway, there's that.
Well, it's because you can make it up in other ways. However, so the current implementation of Spartan in Fairy Stockfish, the most powerful variant engine, has tons of questions that are coming up all the time about it. One, it seems to make very strange moves. 2, it definitely thinks the chess side is winning and by like a full minor. 3, for some reason it thinks the general is stronger than the warlord.
No.
Yeah. So something is going on with Spartan chess and Fairy Stockfish, and I am not sure why. Here, let me read out to you what it thinks the Spartan chess piece values are. I'm scaling this for the rook to be 5 in order to make things work out better. So, yeah, this file. It thinks the queen is 9.89. Okay. The warlord is 7.65. The general is 7.79.
Okay, it's wrong, but keep going.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. It thinks the second king is worth 5.66.
Oh, I have it. Okay, go on.
It thinks the knight is 3.8. The bishop is 3.28. The lieutenant is almost exactly 3, 2.996. The captain is 2.944. And the hoplite, 1.053, but the pawn, it thinks is 0.86 when you scale the rook to be 5.
Right.
So it thinks the hoplite is definitely stronger than the pawn by...
It is.
Okay. So what do you think about all of that?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I think it's got its numbers wrong. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
This. And the other...
I'll tell you how these numbers were gotten later.
Okay, and I think the only rationale I can come up with why the game's balanced is because as the game goes on, as pieces are removed from the board, the Persians become stronger because the board opens up and rooks and bishops and queens can slide long distances and get stronger. But also simultaneously, I think, and this is just my rationale, the hoplites get stronger.
That's
fair. A king cannot stop a hoplite from getting across the board. in most cases.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've noticed on variants that are close to balanced, but one side starts at the advantage, as long as they fall off quicker than the other side, then it's entirely up to them to press the advantage. And usually throughout the mid game, there are ways for the other side to slow things down and actually get closer to their winning game state and come out. At some point, they end up equal in those situations. That's how Sino chess kind of works. That's how our first Shang-Chi implementation that was balanced worked. It was like a Shang-Chi Jungi hybrid.
Mhm.
And in that one, the the Shang-Chi side, with the help of the Jungi pieces, was complete. It had complete control during the first 10 moves of the game. But after that, if the chess side managed to last past that, the chess side would have complete control for the next 20. And by complete control, I mean the chess side was not allowed to make a mistake during the first 10 moves or they lost. And then the Shang-Chi side wasn't allowed to make a mistake for 20 after that.
Fascinating.
It was interesting.
Hard to imagine, but go ahead. I believe you.
It was just because of the sharpness. Mostly. So the chess army was very weak to the way the cannon moved because of the very
Yes.
because of the very close formation, and we had to slow the cannons down a little bit so they weren't allowed to just take the rook on turn one. But because the cannons are so able to harass a completely compressed brick of a formation, it put chess under that pressure, despite the equivalencies in the army strength-wise. But then the queen has the same types of advantages, if not worse, against the Shang-Chi army. But it takes time for them to get past the cannon issues first.
Right.
So
have to open things up. Okay.
yeah. So that's how and why it worked that way.
So you have different numbers for the chess pieces in mind for Spartan chess? I think you were hinting at?
Yeah, so it thinks, for one, the Spartan army appears to have made pawns weaker than they are in the normal chess game.
Okay.
By 0.14 of a pawn, and if you have 8 pawns, that's significant.
Times 8, yeah.
And then it made the queen a little stronger, not by much. And it also made the knight much stronger. So knights, apparently, are worth almost 4 pawns. Or worth almost 4 hoplites, almost 5 pawns.
That... Okay, I just have to go with that. I wouldn't have thought that, but okay.
But the reason I question all of this data that we got from Fairy Stockfish, even though it was achieved through self-play tuning, where the engine was trying to get stronger by tweaking the values of pieces inside of its own code, and that process, once iterated enough, will settle the piece values somewhere that should result in best play. However, Spartan chess has some very weird quirks for Fairy Stockfish. It's something I'm currently concerned about, but I haven't been able to put my finger on it. I think it might have something to do with the duplicate implementation, messing with the alpha beta tree search. But
okay.
So you let the hoplites double step, and they jump, so
Only
they don't
on the
trip
first
over.
move, of course. Only on
Yes.
the first move, of course. Right.
So that doesn't cause them to trip over themselves, and that's a big deal.
Well, it came about the last two changes I made to the game were the hoplites jumping, and that little weird as hell sideways move for the lieutenant, where they can change their color.
Yeah.
And all I can say about that is that once I'd done that, I went, that seems to work. I mean, there was no theory to it other than I just tried it and it seemed to work. So anyway, there it is.
Well, thank you. In all fairness, that is the single worst recording session I have ever had when it comes to background noise. I had both my roommates in the room, one of them full-on competitive playing Smash Bros, one of them playing TikTok on their phone in front of their face instead of, you know, doing the homework that they were supposed to be doing. Both of them tried to talk to each other during that video. One of my roommate's girlfriends tried to talk to him during that video. And the cat just really wanted her person's attention the whole time. It was awful. But Streetman and I had a cool discussion, and after rewatching the recording, I wasn't willing to part with it. So here it is. I know the background noise sucked. Thank you for bearing with me. I edited out as much as I could. I cut it down. But it should be decent. Now, Fairy Stockfish, for its potential flaws that I brought up in this video, Fairy Stockfish, for its flaws, is playing this game at a stronger level than any other entity on the planet. And despite the fact that it thinks that the chess side is winning by a pretty large margin, and it weirdly values the warlord in this case, it's stronger than me and is stronger than any other computer at this game. And it actually has a better win rate with the Spartan side in self-play than would be suggested by the difference in strength of, I would say it's 2 point something, but that's 2 point something pawns of advantage. And pawns are valued at about 0.8. So let's just assume it was 2.5 because my memory isn't perfect. But even that, that's exactly 2. So 2 pawns of advantage could be exactly made up for by changing the general back to a chancellor, which is a rook knight. And if that wasn't enough, then you could also make the Spartans the side going first. And honestly, that would be kind of cool. Because it would mean that, technically speaking, it would mean Streetman had it more balanced, if it works, before he consulted Fairy Max with his human play. And that thought makes me happy. Anyways, Streetman had been amazing, by the way. My interactions with him have been some of the best interactions I've had with any chess variant creator. Like, even the Mad Chess dev wasn't as kindred a spirit as Steven was, and as immediately on board with my project and being like, oh yeah, use it. This fits perfectly. So in addition to building the army itself, he also did a ton of research into Spartan government during his time making this game. So he sits here, and in this like big paper, I'm tempted to read it to you. Yeah. Spartan government in 4 parts. A man argued that Sparta should set up a democracy. Quote, begin with your own family, unquote. Lycurgus, king of Sparta. Spartan government is the strangest that he's studied. It had elements of a monarchy, an aristocracy, an oligarchy, a democracy, a republic, and the 1950s TV game show Queen for a Day. It has, nevertheless, been among the most stable and long-lived governments the world has ever known. It was a monarchy. The Spartan kings was a hereditary rule by kings. Sparta had 2 kings, a diarchy for you linguists. The point of having 2 kings was stability. 2 kings prevented problems that so often arose in monarchies when the only king died. Anarchy ensued and civil war was held to determine the next king. Spartan kings ascended to the throne from two royal families, the Agid and the Eurypontid. These families were not allowed to intermarry and could have been the stuff of a Spartan Romeo and Juliet story if there had been romance and literature in Sparta. The kings held military, political, and religious power. They led and trained the army, sort of, held seats on the council, an otherwise elected and legislative body, and performed various religious and ceremonial duties. Despite having a monarchy, Spartan politics was, as you will see, dominated by bureaucracy. When things became just too deliberative, too mired in political red tape, about the only thing a kid could do to unilaterally and by decree was assemble his 300-man bodyguard and march off to places like Thermopylae and then, very gloriously, die. Part 2. Aristocracy. Social station was determined by hereditary. Spartan society was divided into three groups. The Spartiates, I'm going to butcher these pronunciations, dear Lord. Perioeci? Perioeci, forgive me, and the Helots. Helots? Helots. I think of the Spartiates as a city folk. They lived in the city of Sparta, could vote, could hold political office, and had the honor and, quote, joy of a lifetime of honorable service to the state as Spartan soldiers, if male. He thinks of the Perioeci as country folk. They lived in the rural area around Sparta, paid taxes but could not vote. They were farmers, merchants, and artisans. They provided food and other stuff needed by the Spartiates like chairs, pottery, swords, armor, and shields. Last were the Helots, a class of slaves. They lived in several provinces surrounding and conquered by Sparta. Each Spartiate was assigned a farm run by Helots, which they probably never visited, the foundation of Spartan wealth. The Spartiate was further divided into three social classes, the royals, the aristocracy, and the general citizens. Which group you belonged to determined your station in Spartan society, and what political offices you could hold. Since there was no social mobility, the question, who's your daddy, was very important in Spartan society. The oligarchy, the council, the rule by an elite few. More powerful than the kings was the council, or Gerovsia, 30 of the most elite members of Spartan society. The council was composed of the 2 kings and 28 nobles. The king's membership on the council was automatic, but the 28 nobles were elected from members of the aristocracy who were at least 60 years old and thus retired from military service. Council members served for life. The council formulated laws, set foreign policy, and acted as the court where all cases were tried. The council was sort of a Congress, Secretary of State and Supreme Court all rolled into one. Extremely powerful, except for the checks held on it by the Assembly and the Ephorate. Democracy, the Assembly. Power rests with the people or their elected representatives. The Assembly was made up of all male Spartiates who were at least 30 years old. The Assembly voted on laws formulated by the council, elected councilmen, and elected magistrates. More on them in a bit. When considering legislation formulated by the council, the Assembly could not debate or even discuss the legislation. All they could do was vote yes or no on the proposed law. Thus, the Assembly confirmed or vetoed the council's legislation. While this was in theory a very powerful democratic body, in practice it was not. It turns out that if noblemen did not like the ruling of the Assembly, claiming it was, for example, crooked, they could just ignore it. This is, with full respect to King Lycurgus, see opening quote, how democracy works in families where parents don't like the votes of their children, isn't it? Republic, the Ephorate. Rule by representatives elected by the people. Sparta had all the bases covered in their 3 branches of government, the monarchy, the council, and the assembly. Enough for most countries, I would think, but not for Sparta. The real power rested with the Ephorate, 5 magistrates elected by the assembly. Any Spartiate, from the poorest to the richest and most noble, could be a magistrate or ephor. Magistrates served for a period of 1 year and could only serve as a magistrate once in their lifetime. The magistrates ran the military, ran the Spartan education system, which was mainly military training, decided which infants were unfit to become Spartans and therefore put to death, negotiated foreign treaties, presided over the meetings of the council, could veto any action of the council, could veto any action of the assembly, and ran the Cryptia or Spartan secret police. What's more, whenever a Spartan king would leave the city, say on a military campaign, 2 magistrates would accompany him to keep tabs on him. Magistrates could give orders for what the military was to do. Magistrates could even bring criminal charges against a king, but only when they had divine support, whatever that entailed for the charges. Supreme power was with the duly elected representatives of the assembly, the magistrates. But what held the magistrates in check? It turns out that after they served their term in office of 1 year, they were audited. If they were found to be not acting in the interests of Sparta or corrupt, there was punishment. I don't know what the punishment was, but I imagine it would make the Japanese practice of seppuku look tame by comparison. They were Spartan after all. TV show Queen for a Day. The elections. Vote by applause. As pointed out already, the assembly elected the council, the magistrates, and confirmed or vetoed legislation proposed by council. Just how was the assembly's vote taken? It turns out that votes in the assembly were taken by applause. In the case where an opening came up on the council because one of its members died, candidates for the position would be held in a room adjoining the assembly. One by one, candidates would be presented to the assembly, and the candidate receiving the most applause would become the new council member. Now, that's fascinating. And he put this together just because he wanted to talk about it. And I have the utmost respect for that level of dedicated nerdiness in any regard, especially when it creates an army of this quality. All that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day.